welcome everyone. Well, I'm Bask Iyer. Thank you for coming. We have a fabulous panel, but I want to start off with what I thought Agentic AI was. I had to read up on it. I thought I knew. And, agents making decisions autonomously and, making calls without humans. My first question is, I'm going to start with Norm and go in that order. Haven't we been doing this? Is there a new term? But automaton was pretty much making decisions without humans, right? So what do you think about it?
So I'm Norman Sadeh. I'm a professor at Carnegie Mellon. It's a pleasure to be here. Thank you for having me on this panel. I work in AI and human interaction, cybersecurity, privacy, and AI policy. Also co-founded and co-direct the privacy engineering program at Carnegie Mellon, which is considered to be the top program in this space. And I've done a few other things, including starting companies. I was the founding CEO of Wombat Security Technology, a company that I sold to Proofpoint in 2018 for $250 million. That company is helping tens of millions of employees around the world stay secure. And I've done a few other things, such as working for government at some point in time. Now, to get to your question, so I've been around for a long time, and in fact, I've been working on AI agents for about 40 years. And so this is not exactly a new concept, but obviously what we have seen most recently is an acceleration in the capabilities of AI that has opened the door to all sorts of different things. So 40 years ago, I was working on AI-based scheduling, supply chain management. 20 years ago, I was working on automated trading technologies. Over the past 15 years, I've been working on AI privacy assistance, functionality that reads privacy policies automatically, helps you configure your privacy settings, AI cybersecurity assistance that help answer your cybersecurity questions, nudge you to make the right decisions, pay attention to things that you would naturally tend to overlook. So to not take over the whole panel here, I think that the appeal of agents has to do with the fact that, unfortunately, brain power has not increased that dramatically over the past 50 years, but the power of computers has and will continue to. And the same applies to AI. And so increasingly, it's very tempting to say, let's delegate these tasks to AI. And so AI agents are all about delegating different tasks to AI. And the more you delegate, presumably the more productive you are, the happier you are, except that obviously, occasionally these agents may not fully understand what you would like to do. They might misinterpret things. They might make things that you wish they didn't make. And obviously, it's very easy to come up with all sorts of horror scenarios, which I'm sure we're going to be talking about. So I'm going to stop here.
Hi, Aditya Thadani with H&R Block, VP of AI Platforms. And I work primarily right now on building AI systems, really maybe more exploring building AI systems to reimagine the experience, the services we offer, but also the service operations that goes into delivering. When I think about agents and agentic systems, the kind of two things that come to mind that we hear about a lot, the agency aspect of it and the autonomy. The agencies, in some ways, I think over the last year or so, we made the transition where LLMs went from talking to doing, right? That's, to my mind, the key element of agency. And that, obviously has a lot of value to business. And we kind of look at how do we do that reliably, consistently, predictably, something that maybe you could say we struggled with LLMs, generally speaking, right? The reliability, the consistency. But the autonomy part, to my mind, is a bit trickier from a definitional perspective. Even in people within organizations, we talk about autonomy in such different terms. And to my mind, the limited indication of autonomy I see right now in agentic systems is to the extent that we are designing systems that have made the leap from reacting and responding to a user to actually driving to an outcome, pursuing an objective of its own, right? So to the extent that if you think about a person talking to an agentic system, it's gone from just responding to what the user says, to actually driving the conversation, the interaction to some objective. And that, to my mind, is a limited. But autonomy, especially in humans, when we talk about it, is such a broad concept that I struggle to see true autonomy in these systems yet.
Hey, everybody. Beth Linker. I'm the Chief Product Officer at Finite State. We're a cybersecurity company helping connected device manufacturers keep their products secure. And we are using AI to do that. And what we're seeing as we build AI agents, as we work with organizations who are adopting AI agents in their software development process and their product security process, is that we're at a really interesting place. And the shift from LLMs that could take a prompt and give you their best guess at what you wanted in response, to LLMs that can use tools. So as Aditya said, the difference between talking and doing with tools, in particular with the rollout of things like MCP, Model Context Protocol, from Anthropic, we're opening up what's possible at a really astonishing rate. And in doing so, we're going to find out some of the limitations of these things the hard way, as people discover new and innovative ways to attack these new tools that are operating within all of our environments and all of our workplaces. And so it's a really, I think, exciting time to be working with agents, to be figuring out how to use agents responsibly and how to measure the behavior of agents in a world where everything is becoming less predictable, less deterministic, and the way that it worked yesterday may not be the way that it works today. And so all of our frameworks for technology are going to have to stretch a little bit as some of these things become more variable.
So let's get a debate into that at some stage, but let's get into trust, which is the topic of what we're talking about. We're struggling to define agentic AI because some of it is already shown in other computer systems, but each of us have an interesting definition. I'm an old enterprise IT person, and we struggle to even find out how many people work for the company. It sounds ridiculous, but we had to put so many systems to find out who work for us. Are we paying the wrong people, etc.? And we finally somewhat got a hold of it. Reminds me of a Seinfeld episode where George will show up to some office and people thought he worked there and nobody knew. So my concern is, first of all, how do you do trust in this kind of environment? Secondly, even as a CIO, I don't know where my agents are. I don't know who's deploying agents. And I don't even have an inventory. And then interoperability of agents, because I believe it's a democratic process and every person here is going to deploy agents. And so I'm looking at it as, how do you handle it and how do you build trust? So first question is, and I'm going to put it to the H&R Block company because your whole business is on trust. So Aditya, how do you build trust within the AI systems?
So you're absolutely right. Trust is absolutely central to our business. We are in the advice business, taxes, and financial services. And when you kind of think about from a consumer perspective, they have come to trust the brand. They have come to trust the advisor that's sitting across the desk from them. They are implicitly trusting the systems that we all use in service delivery. But they also kind of trust the warranties that come with that service, right? So the trust is kind of made up of all of these elements, and in many ways is earned through repeated interactions, interaction after interaction. And to my mind, in many ways, if AI systems are going to enter this equation in a meaningful way, they have to play by the same rule of earning that trust, right? Interaction after interaction. So I think people are going to trust systems the way they have always trusted systems. The example I kind of think about is we all take online payments for granted now. Wasn't the case 20 years ago, right? A whole ecosystem had to evolve to build that trust, right? We have to get to the same place. If we are going to realize value from this tech, we have to get to the same point from an ecosystem perspective.
It looks like you're itching to go. How would you build trust?
I was nodding in agreement. And I think the thing about trust is that it's fragile. So you can work really hard to build and maintain your customers' trust as a business. And all it takes is one really bad situation to make that completely evaporate. And, I was also thinking, Bask, as you were talking about, the challenges of, IT traditionally. How many people do I have? How many servers do I have? How many devices do I have? And all of those have always been moving targets. And how many agents do I have is going to be a moving target too. And if you look at how we've evolved from, the old days when you had a network and everything was inside the perimeter and you could trust the stuff inside, but not the stuff outside, to now when you've got things like zero trust. I mean, we're going to need a zero trust for agents. We're going to need really crisp ways to articulate how do we identify agents? How do we know that they represent who they claim to represent? And how do we articulate what it is that they are or are not allowed to do? And I think that a lot of that is still developing.
Norma, I'm going to twist it. You're used to working with smart people, so I'm going to ask you a tougher question. So it's not just one agent. It's like an agent interacting with another agent. So could you have two good agents, which 1 + 1 becomes evil or not trustworthy?
Well, I'm sure that you can, right? And so in a way, the problem that you're describing here is not new, right? You can have two quote unquote good pieces of software in the sense that each one of them has been tested to meet certain types of criteria. And then you put them together and hoping that together going to do something, except that in truth, they're not quite fitting the profile and the role that they're supposed to play within that scenario. And all of a sudden, two good pieces of software, perhaps with AI in this case, are no longer going to behave as expected. The truth is, could you even define what a good AI is? I think that this is very challenging. So perhaps going back to the original question here, can we really trust these products? Ideally, we'd like to be able to. We've been living in a world where we've placed our trust in a number of different products. Even before any AI found its way into products, software, as we know, has been deployed with bugs. I mean, there was a time 20 plus years ago when Microsoft was known to release new versions of its operating system with 50,000 plus bugs in it. And yet we would all adopt the technology. What's challenging today is that with AI, these products, these technologies are becoming increasingly complex. And so testing that technology and testing all these interactions in also an ecosystem where increasingly software builds on top of other software. It's not even just two agents. It's going to be a multitude of agents interacting with one another. So how can you provide any sort of guarantees within this environment? And the quick answer is it's impossible, right? So just a few days ago, ChatGPT 5 was released, right? And different people started to write articles about whether or not it's good, whether it's better, this and that. In truth, nobody has any clue. You cannot fully test this thing. It might look very good for a while. Increasingly, we're going to rely on all these users of the system collectively, hopefully reporting potential problems. And then when something bad happens, hopefully that's going to be picked up very early. Hopefully some of these things will be picked up before the product gets released. That would be the better scenario. Can we have regulations to help us? How far can these regulations go? I assume we're going to be talking about those things. So don't want to preempt future questions. And I realize I've answered more than your question.
No, good. But I'm landing in somewhere between where Beth is and you two are, because as a chief information officer or a technology guy, I'm still going to be held accountable when these things do something. So I do want something like a zero trust, but I like the idea of building trust. That's how we build trust with humans, right? We start off with no trust or a little trust, but then you have to prove that you're worth the trust over a long period of time. Maybe you need a combination of both is what I think. And when I look at critical cases, zero trust is probably not a bad idea. It may slow down progress, but maybe in a regulated environment, you can speed up process if you have the zero trust. I don't know. I'm landing somewhere in the middle.
Could I potentially respond to this?
Yeah.
So I think one of the challenges that we're facing today is that people are not sophisticated enough to necessarily be able to make good judgments when it comes to deciding what they can trust and what they cannot trust. So yes, brand reputation is a big deal, and we want to continue, and people will clearly continue to build up their brand. But in truth, today my car is a different car nearly, every week as new software gets downloaded. And so perhaps it was a great brand last week. Do I still trust it this week? And what do we need to help us as everyday consumers to somehow be able to trust these products? Clearly, we're not able ourselves to do all the checking that needs to be done. And so what potential regulation or best practices would we want to see being adopted over time to make that task easier for people, to enable people to continue to trust these technologies?
You want to go to the next one, which is getting a little bit harder now. Okay. If let's talk about both brand and liability. Okay. So I come to you and do my taxes. I don't want to get audited. I don't want to hear that you're using AI and AI screwed up or agent screwed up. I don't want to know about your technology now. I just want to make sure it works. So how would you, who's liable? How do you handle this? Can you get away by saying, sorry, Bask, I used an agent, and then you're going to get put into prison?
No, I think you're spot on. In many ways, when consumers are engaging with brands, all of these details in some ways are important but immaterial, right? Because when you think about it, so we deployed an AI assistant for helping people who are trying to do, using our software to do their own taxes. Right? When we deploy it, we offer the same warranties to a user that uses the AI assistant that they used to get the day before the AI assistant was there, right? So as a company, when we deploy these systems, we essentially have to offer the same warranties. We have a product called Peace of Mind that protects you against an IRS audit, right? So all those things have to stay in place. And we as designers and builders have to put together systems that kind of support that warranty, right? That's in some ways how we are trying to earn that trust, right? Now, part of that also is that the risk profile as designers is changing a lot, right? We go to market through 50,000 or so people, advisors, who are serving our clients, doing taxes every year. And if you look at each one of them, they may have a few thousand interactions, client interactions in a year, each one of them. You deploy an AI assistant, in early years, it had millions of transactions in a year, right? So suddenly you are actually creating a totally different kind of risk profile because as much as it is AI from a client's perspective, it has to align with our values, with the brand voice. And I think the onus, to your point, the onus is on designers and builders to make sure that these systems represent those values and align with that, with what we want to stand for.
Beth, you work with CISOs quite a bit, I would assume, or, they've been made the scapegoat for a period of time, right? If something happened, cybersecurity, ransomware, you said, oh, the CISO didn't do his job or whatever. I don't think somehow when you're actually using agents to run your business, to increase your profitability, productivity, etc., I have a feeling that management cannot have that cop-out to just put it on a CISO or he or she is accountable. So what is your perspective? Who's accountable?
So it's interesting to me that when we talk about AI agents making mistakes, we often either implicitly or explicitly hold them up in comparison to humans who never make mistakes. Oh wait, that's not right. And it's it's interesting because if you look at a lot of security mistakes, a lot of security breaches, in a lot of really high-profile cases, the information was there, but the people couldn't see it because it was buried in so much other information. And so, we're talking about bringing AI agent technology, which can make mistakes, to augment humans who also sometimes make mistakes. And a lot of those agents are trained off of human behavior, which isn't perfect. And so I think that we have to think about it less in terms of what if this makes a mistake, and more in terms of what mitigations can you put in place for the inevitable mistakes that will occur. So Aditya, you were saying that the number of interactions your AI assistant can have is so many orders of magnitude larger than what one person can do. And so sort of the blast radius, if there's something incorrect in an AI assistant like that, could be a lot bigger. So, thinking about how do you mitigate some of that? How do you measure it? And then at the end of the day, as a software provider, we're making tools. We can train people. We can give them the ability to use those properly. But at the end of the day, they've got to figure out how to operate it safely within their risk tolerances. And I think, one of the things I've seen a lot of people I've worked with who've gone, oh, the AI made a mistake. And it's like, yeah, but your job was to catch it. So having humans in the loop and making sure that they're set up to be successful. And I think, reviewing AI output is not necessarily a thing that most of us are good at. It's not a skill that we've all had a chance to build. So it's going to be really interesting to see how that evolves, and whether it's humans reviewing AI output or agents reviewing other agents and trying to get to some kind of consensus, which again is a thing that we've got a lot of established precedent on. I think that we're going to have to evolve how we do all that.
Well, I think we're dancing around some core issues here, and so perhaps it's time to mention them. I would start with the need to have some kind of a common framework to help organizations, whatever their products, systematically analyze the potential risks that are associated with these products, these services. There are frameworks that have been developed, for instance, by NIST. They're not perfect, but they're certainly doing a reasonable job at identifying the many different dimensions along which you want to think. For instance, the NIST AI risk management framework revolves around 4 different dimensions. There's a governance dimension, which has to do with roles and processes and policies that you want to have. There are 3 other dimensions. It's called map, manage, and measure, and that has to do with identifying the different types of risks that you might potentially open yourself up to with your new product or your new service, understanding what those risks are, measuring them, and trying to mitigate them. Now, I would like to add that, so I've been teaching this now for a few years. I teach AI governance at Carnegie Mellon, and one of the first things I tell my students is, I'm going to do my best to teach you everything we know today, or at least a good amount of what we know, but I want you to realize that I don't have any good solutions. And so I've had my students, that's part of the work that they do in the class, I've had them analyze a number of different products using these frameworks and look for potential mitigations. And the sad truth is that there are very, very few mitigations that are really going to enable you to say, oh, wow, we really got this right. You've got concepts like red teaming, you've got algorithmic approaches to dealing with fairness, you've got differential privacy. I mean, you've got a whole series of techniques that I teach, and each one of these techniques, as it turns out, falls short. So I think one of the challenges that we need to realize is that we've moved into a really, really complex environment where we clearly don't want to stop innovation, and I'm not a very strong advocate for very strong regulation in this space. I've got a very different view about privacy. I think GDPR is great, not perfect, but I think it's much better than what we have in most places here in the US. The EU AI Act is a different story in that regard. I think they went a little too far, a little too fast, not knowing what they want to do. So we want to move towards trying to understand best practices, coming up with light regulations that force people to continuously raise the bar as we get better techniques, better methodologies to deal with these many different threats that we're going to deal with.
I have to agree with you. I think I get frustrated when I go to Europe, even to use the internet. By the time you click out the 100 cookies and stuff on your mobile phone, I might as well go and book the thing manually, right? So we don't want to do that. That is, we have to use technology to do it smarter and not just have lawyers, say acceptance for every one of the AI. So hope we don't let regulations stifle innovation, because it is fun. It seems like cool. There's a lot of mundane things I don't want to do that I would love an agent to do. How do you do it carefully, and how do you do it? So I think that's a good balance to have in the perspective, right?
At some point, I'd like to respond to that cookie issue, but the quick answer is that GDPR is not responsible for that, and you can actually develop agents that will deal with that for you. That's the quick answer.
No, I think it's spot on in many ways. At least, in my experience, we are spending more time building tools to test the solution than the time that goes into designing the solution itself, right? And in large part because you kind of have this combination of a stochastic system, non-deterministic system in a dynamic, unpredictable environment. People can say anything when they talk to it, right? When you put that combination together, building confidence, and I think to my mind, you talked about trusts. Before I think about consumers trusting a system, I think about us, the builders, people working on it, having confidence in the system, and what does it take to have that? And with these systems, the way we kind of tested, that is no longer sufficient. Like, it's actually far from sufficient, right? We have far outstripped that. So now we are really spending a lot of time on building tools and frameworks for, be it red teaming and simulating malicious use, but also sort of just the diverse use cases of how people will engage and interact with the technology is so unpredictable in some ways because, people surprise you. Right? Especially when you put something as open-ended as it is in front of people, how they engage and how they interact, it can be really surprising. So, this is really a big part of what we are learning in some ways is how to build solutions. And I think I would kind of go back to the idea of we shouldn't think about these AI systems in isolation. They are always going to live in an ecosystem where there is sort of the old school software, the old school AI, people, all actually meaningful parts of this ecosystem. And we have to kind of design it in a way so that things are kind of compensating for each other's gaps. And I think that's kind of how we build these robust systems.
So we have 5 more minutes before Q&A. I'm going to ask a quick round. As you guys were talking, I'm thinking, are we just making a bigger deal than it really is? Is it just, we've been doing testing, systems, processes. Is this AI now, we're trying to invent something that doesn't exist? Because everything we describe is stuff we've done. And by the way, AI itself, Norm, you reminded me, I did my thesis in AI a long time ago. So it's not a new term. We just made it up in the last few years. So are we just should we just follow some of the guidelines that we've done before, or is there something fundamentally different now?
I think there is something fundamentally different, even though I made the case that agents have been around, that concept has been around. The term agentic, by the way, is a fairly new term. I was not using that until a few years, for many years. But what is new, I think, is the environment where we're deploying these agents, the scale at which we're deploying these agents, right? So agents were really niche for many, many years. And AI was still very niche for many years until maybe 15 years ago. What has changed now is the power of the technology, the investments that are being made in this technology, and how quickly this is likely to change everything. If you think about these agents, they are today going on the web. They can create accounts. They can, use your credit card. They are doing all sorts of things, right, on your behalf, and that's the consumer side of things, right? Think about the military, right? I mean, we've deployed autonomous technology for defense. You look at these amazing guns that you've got on frigates to defend against incoming missiles. That's fully automated, right? And I think the temptation will be to automate more and more, just because, as I mentioned at the beginning, brain power is not really improving at the same speed as computers. And so it's really tempting to delegate more and more. And so when you look at the power of this technology, what it's capable of doing, how tempting it is to rely more and more on that, replacing all your employees perhaps with agents at some point, which is clearly very tempting. And we're seeing some of that in software development and all sorts of other industries. If you're staying here at the MGM Grand and you call the concierge or whatever it is, you fall on an AI. Today. It can be a little frustrating because that technology is not perfect. So I think that's not going to be the most horrific scenario. I can survive with that. But there are clearly scenarios, I think, where the consequences could be extremely, extremely drastic. So I don't think that we're, making this a bigger deal than it is. It is a huge deal with potentially asymptotic scenarios that are absolutely horrific.
And to some extent, in this industry, everything old is new again every couple of years. And so there are definitely a lot of things where, the threats associated with AI are the same ones that we had when we put everything on the internet. But I think also, to Professor Sadeh's point, the sort of explosive nature of the reach that generative AI agents have because of APIs and things like Model Context Protocol, where you can really just open things up at a really rapid clip, is creating new and previously unimagined ways of taking advantage of users who think that, everything is okay until they discover that, the set of rules that they downloaded from the internet for their coding agent apparently had a bunch of stuff in it that wasn't supposed to be there, and now it's deleting all their files. And there are a lot of new attack vectors in this stuff. And I think that the speed at which some of these can go from 0 to 100 is different from human error. So it's the same, but also, I think that proceeding with caution from a safety perspective, from a regulatory perspective, from an internal governance perspective, makes a lot of sense. Like, you can't stop, but you also can't say, yeah, it'll be fine. We don't really need anything for governance, because that's not going to work.
Okay. So we have about 7 minutes for questions. If anybody has a question.
I have a question about tort liability. And as you mentioned, that humans are not perfect, and tort liability is based on the idea of a reasonable person, that you're not liable if you act as a reasonable person under those circumstances. And yet when we talk about electronic, self-driving cars and the Tesla and the recent cases where they've been found liable, we've not held that same standard. At least it doesn't seem that way. And I was curious to see where you see a liability going forward and where that standard may be.
I'm not a lawyer, but the way I look at it is if the self-driving car puts me in a wrong place or puts me in a dangerous situation, I'm going to hold the company accountable. I'm not going to give it a pass because it's a software agent. At the same time, it is true that humans make a lot of mistakes. Sometimes I like driving this autonomous car. It seems to be safer to me, and I don't have to have a conversation. So that's a call that you would make, right? So it seems safer to me somehow. But I would hold, not knowing what the law is, I'm probably going to say, I'm going to call the CEO of the board and say, what the hell is going on? That's my call.
So I'm not a lawyer either, but leaving aside the car crashes and the other really horrible things that AI could be responsible for in some form or another, I'd like to point out there are lots of other scenarios where tort might be more difficult to prove today. Just think about communication that will be taking place between agents. Think about information that that will be shared by these agents about different people, the inferences that might be made based on that information. People might get denied health insurance, life insurance, mortgages, and all sorts of other things. And tracing that back to a particular technology will prove very, very difficult. This is one reason why I think there is a need for people to more carefully document their products, and people will not do this out of their own benevolence. I think companies will need to be told that there is an expectation of minimal documentation, minimal testing, so that you can trace this back to someone. Because those consequences, even though they're not as bad as directly killing someone in a car crash, can still be extremely dramatic. And I believe, even though I'm not a lawyer, that our laws right now are not necessarily sufficient when it comes to that.
Quick question in this way. I know putting laws like what EU AI Act has created, learning and all kinds of everything disclosures versus completely freedom of not doing it. Is there a between place that where human in the loop is mandated? Even with the most sophisticated agentic system, if humans are put in a certain place, not just by companies' own doing or their own risk tolerance, but as a mandate, what do you think about that kind of a way to govern this, and where would that go? I just wanted to get perspective.
Does anybody, you have a point of view, Aditya? Or?
Maybe a bit of a contrarian point of view. As a designer and builder, I kind of think of how do you get a responsible AI or responsible system of any kind is to build responsibly, right? I think what you're asking is that enough? Can we trust people to just do the right thing? And no, I think that you're right. In the end, social systems, institutions, governmental systems are all designed around checks and balances, right? Yes, do the right thing. And yes, somebody is verifying that you're doing the right thing. I suspect that we are all going to navigate and find that equilibrium in this space. It's still new and evolving very fast, and we'll struggle to keep up with it, but we'll find it, I suppose.
I'm not sure that your interpretation of the EU AI Act is entirely accurate. But going back to some of the scenarios I was mentioning earlier, for instance, being denied health insurance or a mortgage, for instance, there is something in the EU privacy law, GDPR, and that we also have here in many different states like California, CCPA, and it's the right for people to access their data and review it for potential errors. GDPR also has a right to object to automated decision-making, which is basically, if I get denied my mortgage or my health insurance, I have the right to request that a human being reviews the decision in case there is a mistake. And I think that's something that we need to have. That means that these AI systems will have to maintain, again, some traces for what they're doing, be able to explain their reasoning, and engage potentially even in dialogue with the user, because at scale, we may not be able to have a human being every time there's a decision that's made that you want to potentially object to.
Would you agree that one of the challenges in validating the outputs of classical AI agents versus generative AI agents would be the non-deterministic nature of the outputs in the generative AI as opposed to the more deterministic outputs of the classical AI, and that we don't have enough frameworks or models for testing and validating this scenario that we're coming on with the undeterministic part of it?
Yeah, Beth, do you want to give it?
Yeah, I mean, I think that's a great point. And if you look at software development, a lot of developers don't even have good automated tests for their deterministic code, never mind generative AI. So, there is still a lot of maturing to do around this. And, I've seen it with my own teams where we've built something using, a commercial LLM, and one week it was working great, and then the next week everybody said, hey, this doesn't seem to be working as well. And we had really nowhere to go for, well, what changed and why? And that is probably only going to get harder as we go. So we're going to have to get creative about how we measure it and manage it.
All right. I think we hit about the time. So let me just thank the panelists for a fabulous discussion and the audience for participating. My takeaway is this is an exciting time. I don't want to put a downer on it. It's a fabulous thing. Even I feel like I want to get back in and do things. So if we tackle the trust and liability issues earlier, and we can actually let the developers go faster and speed up innovation rather than slow down. So thank you very much for the panelists, and thank you for the crowd. Appreciate it. Thank you.